Hello, Redefiners. Welcome back to Leadership Redefined. We hope you've had a lovely couple of weeks since we last posted our first ever episode. Since we posted, we've received some really amazing feedback and comments from our listeners, and today we're going to be building on some of that. So, we spoke last time around things feeling unexpected and not necessarily having a checklist or a blueprint for leadership. And upon that, one of the things that we heard from one of our listeners was the expectation or the need as a leader to actually build our own one. So, in today's episode, we're going to be focusing in on that and what it means to us to be building our own blueprint. And especially, it feels really fitting, especially as we are emerging leaders and we are building our own blueprint. So we want to encourage our listeners and other possible emerging leaders to think about what this means for them as well. So, Gunjan, what does it mean for you to build on your blueprint for leadership?
So for me, building a blueprint has never been theory based. It's been lived through constructing something from movement, a lot of uncertainty, and intention. So
Mm,
I've always been a doer. I grew up in an immigrant family. I've moved a lot, houses, countries, schools. And that kind of childhood teaches you from a really early on how to adapt, how to
mm,
read situations quickly, how to step in when things feel unstable. You don't really wait for that permission. You just figure it out. And
yeah.
it's quite often I've been someone where I'm just fixing things, what I could fix. When I notice a gap, I step into that gap.
Mm,
And when I hit the point where I cannot control everything, I had to learn how to let some of it go. And honestly,
mm,
that is still a really hard part, which is, taking responsibility without carrying everything is one of the biggest leadership tensions for me. I think
mm.
I never waited for a blueprint, if I'm going to be really honest. I'm still building my blueprint. And in that building, I don't think, there's one ever perfect blueprint. Leadership
Mm.
kind of forms while you're already in it.
Yeah, that is true, isn't it? I know we spoke about it, didn't we, about that, there isn't a checklist, but it is interesting that you say that actually that you kind of it forms when you're already in it and you don't really wait for one. You kind of end up in a leadership role, don't you? So I suppose mine's not actually too dissimilar to you, where I think for me one of the big things though was putting myself into the spaces where I saw
Mm,
those leaders and I saw those role models that I had, and to actually be able to learn from them. So part of my building my blueprint was actually learning from others, I think, more than anything. So not expecting leaders to come in and tell me exactly how I should be doing it, but seeing them in action and seeing what they do really well and maybe what I would do differently in my own style. Not because it's wrong, but just because I would of course be a different leader as you would be to me as well. So um
yeah.
I think when I think about it for me, I think about two words that spring to mind. So curiosity. So curiosity about other people and people's leadership and the way that other people work, and curiosity about what actually leadership means,
Mm,
especially in different contexts. Because, like I said to you in the last one, I've been a leader in the hospitality industry. I've been a leader in psychology industry where I've had a team, and now I'm a leader. Well, I'm considered in leadership that doesn't have a team. So it's a different way of leading. So it's
mm,
finding the blueprint for different ways of leading. But also courage. I think for me, I'm always a person who second guesses my next step, and maybe tries to have a plan or a structure or knowing exactly what to expect. So
mm.
that courage to step out of that and do something, even if I don't have the blueprint and I don't know all of the answers. So whether that be learning from a mentor or learning on the job or development, upskilling, whatever that is, but generally coming out of my comfort zone, I think, is something that's built my blueprint for me. What about you?
Mm, I think that the interesting words that I want to pick up is curiosity and courage. Because what
Mm,
I've noticed is I always said yes to opportunities. And what I also recognize is I was trusted with the information. And I think I'm quite a lot of people that do know me have worked alongside me, especially leaders,
mm.
in a interesting manner, call me the hungry hippo.
Yeah.
So it's like stepping into leadership was never linear, like you've mentioned.
Mm,
It came through consistency, it comes through service, But there's also a lot of pressure. And I'm just
Mm,
thinking about the rawness that people don't talk about, which is, the fear of rejection. Burnout was always something in the background because you're saying yes to everything, you're stepping into that responsibility. And I
yeah.
always led from a servitude mindset, so service of within my leadership.
Mm,
Um, I've been questioned a lot of times when it comes to service, when you go above and beyond. And I think I've always had one answer, which is I don't do it because I want to please anyone. I do it because
mm,
that's who I am. I
mm-hmm.
will go above and beyond. I will be honest about it. And that's both good and hard because responsibility helped me grow, but it also meant that I was tired from time to
Mm,
time.
mm,
It also meant that people were leaning on to me as someone that they could look up to as a leader, while
mm,
I had fewer places to lean on to.
mm,
So I never thought in terms of my role. For instance, I've had conversations with people, and when people reach that phase of burnout or reach the phase of fear of rejection, or
mm,
they've had enough in the role, for instance, people saying that, oh, this is my role, this is my job description, this is what I get paid, that's all I'm going to give to this role, nothing
yeah,
more. And I see the
yeah.
dip in motivation. But I have seen myself on the other end where I've said, even if that, my peers have had that situation, I still stepped in and said, I'm going to give it my all in this season. And I think
Mm,
that's build resilience. It's taught me my limits, my capacity. And it
yeah.
is a very difficult environment to be in.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're saying about the burnout. I think in any of the times when I've felt burnout or been feeling close to burnout, I think for me it's very much because of my tendency for perfectionism. I like things being the best standard they can be for myself, and do you know what, part of it is that I don't necessarily like the to get feedback that doesn't work well, because I like to
Mm,
do well. Obviously that comes, and you do get feedback from other people where you need to improve or things need to be better, but generally that need for perfectionism is something that I always
mm,
strive towards. And I think the hardest thing for me is even when I'm feeling that burnt out, to let go of things not always being perfect. And I think that's something as a leader we probably need to talk about. It's not often spoken about,
mm.
where actually as a leader, generally for myself anyway, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I like things to go really well, and sometimes they just don't. Sometimes as a
Mm-hmm.
leader things are out of your control, things don't always go to plan, and that is something for me that is quite hard to sit with.
Yeah.
But in like what you said about that resilience piece, I think that's a really important skill and thing to build as a leader, is that resilience, because like we said, not everything will go your way, not everything will go as expected, and that resilience is kind of what gets you through it, isn't it? It's that
Yeah.
ability to carry on even when things are not perfect, despite
Yeah.
my need for perfectionism.
Yeah. It can be difficult environments. It could be it's just a new task, new project, the newness of
Mm,
things. What I've also noticed is others think that, you're being taken advantage of, for instance.
mm,
But I always saw it as actually, no, someone's entrusted me with this. I think I can do better.
mm,
But that trust comes with a cost. I think leadership that we were making decisions with sometimes incomplete information.
mm,
It also meant disappointing people. That was also sometimes part of decision making. It
mm,
also meant being misunderstood for choices that we make, and they could sometimes be really uncomfortable.
mm,
I mean, I remember once I had, spoken to a leader that I did look up to, um, and they were going through a big business redundancy. And I said, "Oh, you've actually handled this really well." And of course, I did not see what happened behind that process for that leader. Was down when I was in the position where redundancy was ongoing. I realized when someone else told me that sentence that, "Oh,
mm.
Gunjan, you've handled redundancy really well." It put me in a shock where I immediately went back to what I said for the other leader that I did look up to, thinking
Mm,
about you will be misunderstood, there will be uncertainty, there will be uncomfortable decisions. Because at the end of the day, the truth is that leadership is hard and people don't talk about it always. You make decisions, you sort of carry responsibility that others don't see, and you also have to
Mm,
regulate your own emotions so that you can stay steady. So
yeah.
disappointment plus acting with integrity, and it's also staying accountable. It's also sharing what's in my control and what's not in my control.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that part around the emotion regulation, I'm reflecting on what I just said there about the perfectionism, and sometimes you get feedback or comments that aren't necessarily what you expect or what you want to hear. But
Mm,
part of that emotion regulation side of it is being able to manage that, and it's having the strategies so that you don't pass that on to other people. You're not putting your
mm-hmm.
emotions into other people, whether it be a team you're leading or just people you're working with. And part of being a leader is being able to regulate that for yourself and take account for your own emotions, and have the responsibility for that, because ultimately as a leader your role is to lead other people, isn't it, or to
Mm,
lead decisions, or and we're not saying you can't feel emotion. That's a completely different thing, but it's the not letting the emotion cloud your judgment or your decisions in a way that might be harmful. So if
yeah.
you are noticing that, then noticing the strategies that you also have for that. And I
Mm,
think also part of that is, there's lots of ways for that. It's things like becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable and
mm,
putting yourself in situations where you do have to manage your emotions and regulate your emotions. um, but also having the right kind of support network around you. I'm not
mm,
saying overly rely on your support network, but having a network around you that you're able to confide in, you're able to trust, and it feels psychologically safe to have that
mm,
network, then that's really valuable. And at least it has been in my own leadership journey, to just have as a sounding board to ask questions to share my decisions, share my thoughts, and generally get an agreement or a disagreement, and just and have someone to talk it out with, almost a bit like a
mm,
supervision, really.
mm,
Um,
mm,
that support network has been a really valuable part of building that emotion regulation for me as well, because I believe that my support network would tell me if I'm not regulating my emotions, and I would hope they would actually as well. And part of being a leader is taking that on,
yeah.
and knowing that people will be honest with you, even if it's not what you want to hear. So, um, but for you, when you talk about emotion regulation, what is that for you?
I think one of the hardest part, honestly, is emotional regulation because you don't get to fall apart publicly. Some people might say, oh, it's a mask, it's your professionalism, but you carry your fears, your frustration, doubt quietly,
Mm,
and quite often it's more chaotic than it seems, even though it's so calm on the exterior.
mm,
And that emotional labor is rarely acknowledged. I think that part of leadership is real.
mm,
It's about, you know, it's about doing what's within my control, I try to make sure whatever is within my control, within my hands, it is done to the utmost excellence.
yeah.
And understanding that, I mean, you've mentioned the word perfectionism, isn't it? So understanding that leadership isn't always handed to you or isn't formed or built.
Mm,
It's not created by someone else. You create it. I created my leadership journey, decision by decision, season by
mm,
season.
mm,
Nothing was ever fully laid out or readily prepared. You sort of shape it. You create your own language around it. And understanding that um, is what's important. I think that's where I see there are moments where I've questioned myself, moments where I felt isolated, moments where I was dysregulated, where I had to pull myself back together. And I said, nope,
mm,
this needs to change. Things need, it's how much time do you give yourself to grieve? How much time do you give yourself to be dysregulated, to be regulated enough to actually
mm.
come back as a leader? And that's confidence, that's leadership, that's creating your own path. So I didn't disengage, I didn't lose who I was becoming. I was becoming the leader that I wanted to be.
Mm. But I suppose I'm thinking about what you're saying, and it's interesting about the emotion regulation and that kind of bringing ourselves back together and being resilient and things like that. But I also think there is a balance. I think there's a
Mm,
balance of that need for vulnerability within a leadership role for almost the human element of leadership. You know, you need to have an aspect where the people that you're leading or the people you're working with have an element of relating to you and
mm-hmm.
being on that emotional level, because you do. I mean, the whole part of psychological safety is feeling that you can share your thoughts, share your ideas, and be yourself without feeling that judgment or like some kind of negative you know consequence is going to come from that. So you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want our listeners or anyone else thinking about leadership to think, no, it's never okay to be emotional, because
Yeah.
part of emotion drives the decisions that we make, and sometimes emotion can drive some really empathetic and amazing decisions that actually are so much more impactful on a personal level. So there is room still for emotions. It's how those emotions come out, and it's how they are presented, and how they're managed. And so because emotions can help with forming relationships, it can help with building safety, it can help with building trust, and all of those things
Mm-hmm.
are what create that kind of strong relationships and productivity and retention and all those things that we really want. But there is a balance to be had, isn't
Yep.
there?
Yeah. I think the balance is an important key point, isn't it? It's thinking about, when I'm thinking about leadership now, or even thinking about a blueprint, it's not about having all the answers.
Mm,
As a leader, I might not have all the answers. I might take time out to reflect and then, be still and then come up with answers.
mm.
But I think that is also part of building this blueprint. It's a process.
Actually, I'm sort of coming back to my words of courage and curiosity, and I think everything that we're talking about relates to that. I think
Mm.
there's a curiosity in understanding other people and yourself. I think
Mm-hmm.
actually now that we've had this conversation, I'm thinking, do you know what? There is a curiosity in myself and that need for self-reflection, and that has been a humongous part of building my blueprint. Because if I don't know myself, I don't know what kind of leader I am. If I don't know
Yeah.
how to, you know, if I don't know what emotions I'm feeling, I don't know what kind of leader I am. But and also my values as well. What values do I have? What's important to me when I'm leading? Is it important to me? Is it outcomes? Is it
Mm-hmm.
relationships? I think it's a whole host of things really. But that's another thing around that curiosity of my own values and the things that shape the journey and the leadership that I want to bring.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I'm just thinking about the words curiosity and courage. But I suppose thinking about the blueprint, do you have a visual for blueprint? I do. I'm just wondering if you do.
What do you think your metaphor is, Lauren?
So my metaphor is more of a visual. So I can see my blueprint in front of me, and it is what you would kind of imagine as a blueprint if you was building something in like a construction type way. So I imagine it
Mm-hmm.
kind of right in front of me. I'm looking at the plans. And I'm seeing that there are kind of routes and directions or actions that have things to them, and maybe words, thoughts, ideas, those kinds of things in those routes. But I also have some that are going off in a different direction and don't necessarily have anything in them yet. And I'm wondering if part of this conversation around the curiosity and other words that we've used is that actually they will figure themselves out and they will come as I develop and emerge as a leader. So I think it's that there's things that I've already got and there's things that I've learned, but there's also things that I'm yet to learn and to build as well. So, but what about you? Do you have a metaphor for leadership?
Mm, I actually do. And I think the reason why I'm saying I do is because I am a doer, especially in my
Mm,
leadership journey. And I often think leadership like a beehive. From the outside, it looks all organized and
mm,
purposeful. But when you look closer, every bee is doing something different.
Mm.
And none of it is super glamorous at all the time. Some bees are out there foraging, they leave the hive, they take risks, they go to the uncertain world, and they bring resources back. So they learn and gauge. And that's part of leadership, being
Mm.
willing to be the first one to go out, find out, what's known, what's unknown. But knowing that you've got a beehive to depend on, I think that's equally important. While other
Mm.
bees could be, builder bees, they're the ones that are maintaining the structure of the hive, repairing what's, worn down, making sure that the hive looks good and it holds and it's forming.
Yeah.
That's a lot of quiet work. It's repetitive work. It's more like they're investing. It might look easy on the outside, but without it, everything else would collapse. We've I'm also
Mm.
thinking about, the bees that guard. So you've got your guarding bees. They hold the boundaries. They make sure that they're protecting what was built by the other bees in that hive. So the
Mm.
role of being uncomfortable because it involves confrontation, vigilance. It might, have something that's perceived as a problem, having answers for that, creating care around those boundaries. And then I'm also thinking about the bees that, tend to be young, they're regulating themselves and the environment and making sure
Mm.
that, there's balance. When there's chaos outside, you're still emotionally regulating. There's labor, which is real. You're sort of working internally, you're growing, you're learning the
Mm.
different ways of all of the different bees. What's important is that the bees don't get to choose one role forever. They sort of rotate. And
Mm.
I see my leadership style as that rotating bee in different roles. The way you respond season by season, you're thinking about what needs to happen next. I'm sometimes out there taking risk, making decisions, carrying
Mm.
uncertainty, but I'm also building something, fixing something, having answers, creating honey in this metaphor. Sometimes
Mm.
it's guard railing myself or the people that I'm working with, holding boundaries, the ability to say no, or saying yes, taking on responsibility. It could also be that I'm sometimes holding that internal stability, regulating myself, making sure that I'm working on my own fears, my own doubt, my own fatigue.
Mm.
And I think these are the hard things that people don't talk about in leadership. That there is a
Mm.
side where it looks really beautiful, there's so much you can work on, but then there is a side where there's so much work that goes in to be that
Mm.
leader.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to that idea of leaders, of people perceiving leaders to know all the answers and to have all of the answers, and actually they don't, not always,
Mm,
and we're kind of learning them as we go as well. Um, and it's kind of like a myth, isn't it, that leaders, you turn to a leader almost like a parent and they know what to
mm,
do, but
mm,
actually that's
mm,
not really the role of a leader, is it? Is, as we're learning our own leadership blueprint, we're also encouraging other people to think about their own blueprints of their own careers or their own
mm-hmm.
lives, whatever in way we are leading them. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that metaphor. That really got me thinking about what parts I could add into my own.
Mm-hmm.
Have I missed parts of my own metaphor that actually yours have offered there really nicely around the different roles and um, that need for lots of different things and not necessarily saying static. And I think I resonate with that actually quite a lot with you, where always in my experience of us both working together, I know that we're definitely the types to go looking for more and looking for different, and we like to challenge ourselves, we like to push ourselves to different things. I don't think there's ever been a year where we
Very
haven't
true.
tried something different, have we? So
Probably
I
wearing multiple hats all at one time.
exactly. So I hear your metaphor, absolutely hear it. Um, and it's really interesting. So from today, what I'm noticing is lots of really interesting themes around building our own blueprint. So things around things not being perfectly mapped out and
Mm,
looking different for different people, but also how do we take that autonomy, and the steps towards building our own blueprint are things like having that curiosity, having that courage, putting ourselves in the right spaces to learn and develop from other leaders, But also with that comes being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and maybe saying
Mm-hmm.
yes to things that feel difficult, or maybe you would talk yourself out of if you had time to do it. But also knowing that criticism and not being perfect comes with being a leader, that
Yeah.
you're not always going to be perfect, you're not always going to have things go to plan, and you're not always going to know the answers either, and it's okay to not know the answer and to take that away and to learn that from that, and use that as part of your own development as a leader as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also knowing that when we don't know the answer and we don't know our next step, and maybe we do need support, it is okay to ask your network around you for that support, and that actually asking for support is not weakness, but
Mm-hmm.
actually it can be a way of learning, it can be a way of getting that guidance and actually developing and becoming a stronger leader, because we are asking for that, and we're looking to learn from other people's experiences, whether that be through things like our emotions, things like the way that we lead, things like, that we don't, if we don't know the answer, for example. So yeah, that asking for help is not a bad thing.
Ooh, so curious question then. Let's
Mm,
give our redefiners a reflective question.
let's do it.
Um, based off our discussion and what we've just shared, what do you think their question should be?
I think I want the listeners to think about what they're building their blueprint is. What does it mean for them? What is a
Mm,
blueprint to them, really? Because we're using the word blueprint, and actually that's a term that we've used that might not be what our listeners resonate with. So if
mm-hmm.
if it's not a blueprint, what is it for you? What do
Yeah,
you need in order to feel like a leader who has what they need to succeed
yeah.
and to feel confident as a leader? So that's what I want them to think about. And what about you?
Hmm. The question that you're giving is for people to reflect on what their blueprint looks like.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you have a
And
question?
do I have a question? I actually do start thinking about what values am I building from
Ooh.
and what kind of a leader am I becoming
Mm,
and how I'm shaping my life and leadership with intention.
mm,
So rather than waiting for a ready-made blueprint from someone.
yeah, yeah. And I think those questions could go really nicely together, couldn't they? Because
Hmm.
part of what does your blueprint look like might embody the things that you're talking about there and the questions you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's a perfect takeaway, isn't it?
Absolutely. It definitely
And I
is.
think leadership is stop waiting for a perfect blueprint. It's create your own.
I love that. That is literally everything we've said in one sentence. That is amazing. That's brilliant.
Righty, right. So, have we given redefiners enough to digest on?
I think we might have. We've spoken about quite a lot today, haven't we? So, um, thank you so much for listening again, and we look forward to hearing what we look forward to speaking to you in the next one. Please let us know if you want to in the comments what your blueprint is. Please also follow and subscribe to our YouTube. Follow us along on Instagram as well. And until next time, happy reflecting.